I'm Janice Edwards. Coming up on our show today, a preview of the Rainbow Push Technology Conference happening at Cisco. That's next. Join us.
Janice Edwards, it's showtime. It's time to Janice Edwards, it's showtime. It's time to Janice Edwards, it's showtime. It's showtime. Your time to shine.
Welcome to Janice Edwards TV, Bay Area Vista. We are so glad that you are with us today and excited about our guest today. Throughout the years, it's been such a pleasure to talk with Reverend Jesse Jackson about Push, Rainbow Push Silicon Valley, and with Reverend Dr. Joseph Bryant Jr., who is with us today. He's the executive director. There's an upcoming conference, and he's here to tell us all about it. It is wonderful to see you again, Pastor. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you? Thank you for taking the time and thank you for being so amazing.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. You know, throughout the years, we have worked together on different initiatives and different conferences. And so I know that this one is a very special one coming up in Silicon Valley, May 8th and 9th. So what can we look forward to this year?
Well, we're excited to be back in person for the first time since 2019. We have had our last three Push Tech annual conferences online only. And so this year, Cisco headquarters is opening their doors. They're in the Silicon Valley area, San Jose, and we are so excited about two power-packed days of activity that are going to really inspire and uplift and encourage. Starting off with Monday, May 8th, we're re-engaging our community, our contacts, our stakeholders. As Reverend Jackson often says, we're calling the family together so that we can reconnect and do great things together. And we'll be having awards. We'll be having some tech expos. We'll be showing some virtual reality, some AI, artificial intelligence, some youth presentations, some programs we've helped to launch. That'll all kick off on Monday, May 8th. And then on Tuesday, May the 9th, a full day of conversations, panels, executives presenting about diversity, equity, and inclusion, pipelines to employment, opportunities for youth to find their career path, and just so many wonderful things. So it's going to be great. We're looking forward to it.
Yes, and I noticed that you mentioned it's in person, but you also on the registration it says in person and online. Is there an online component to it?
There is a law online. We're going to be live streaming, of course. In this day and age, now everyone has become comfortable with conversations like you and I are having right now, where we can be in two
Absolutely.
totally different locations and still engage in a very meaningful way. So yes, Rainbow Push SV, which is Rainbow Push Silicon Valley.org. All the information is there, and you can go there and register for either the in-person or the online. We want to make sure that people are able to experience this all over the country and really all over the world, because what we're sharing is part of the deeper conversations we should be having about what technology means for us in this day and age. You know, obviously our world has changed, and Reverend Jackson, as you well know, was on the
Yes.
forefront of this. This is not something
Yes.
he just made up because of COVID. He actually years ago, even coming to your studio, meeting with you, doing interviews with you, having conversations with you, 7, 8, 9 years ago, when we first engaged this work, you were right there with us, and we thank you for it. And you helped us to get the message out and to make connections and do interviews with Reverend Jackson, where he saw the need to ensure that inclusion was a reality.
And what we found when we looked is that the 20 top companies, 189 board members, 36 women, 3 African Americans, 1 Latino. Our index of consumption is much higher than that. And then the C-suite's even worse than that. Unemployment for blacks and browns is around 2 or 3%. And when it comes to putting up upfront money for startup companies, almost none. Well, those limitations limit growth. It suppresses black and brown and female potential, but also limits growth. You know, when there's a wall, on both sides of the wall there is ignorance, fear, hatred, violence, and limitations. But when the walls come down, we can share the sunlight and we can all grow. And that's the whole point of our mission, is not too much so much as to disrupt, but that's to fulfill the law of the American promise.
And this year's theme, intentional inclusion, is just that we make sure that, minority population, black and brown, young people and job seekers, and even small businesses, minority businesses and women-owned businesses all get a chance to be a part of our ecosystem known as technology, which has taken over our world even more than we ever thought. And so it's going to be great. We want everyone to experience it, and they can go to rainbowpushsv.org and see the registration information and get connected.
Yes, and we will certainly put that up on the screen as well toward the end of the show, again, just to remind people. And yes, it was wonderful to interview Reverend Jackson when he came out at the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about some of the history, how everything began with Rainbow Push Silicon Valley with the tech initiatives, and what has happened since then that has been positive in terms of just advancements.
I'm honored to do so. I've been able to watch this journey with Reverend Jackson over the past really 10 years, but he started long before that. Back in the 1990s, Reverend Jackson visited Silicon Valley in the late 1990s, met with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and a lot of those pioneers of the technology movement, some of the first founding fathers of Google, and he wanted to see what this new thing was becoming, what technology was becoming, and even his contacts at that time with Hewlett Packard, Intel, just finding out technology was moving beyond just microchips in a computer, but actually taking over our world in terms of how we engage, how we interact, how we communicate, how we, handle our business, how we do banking, how we handle our commerce, how we handle, travel arrangements and schoolwork and education. I mean, everything was going to be linked into this new system. He started then wanting to have the conversation. How do we make sure that ethnic minorities, women, those that are often, marginalized and forgotten, how can we make sure that they're a part of it? Fast forward to 2013, Reverend Jackson said, hey, there's this thing now, this social media. It's taking over the world. His kids and grandkids are telling him about Facebook, and back then it was MySpace. It was still on the horizon.
Yes.
And he asked Butch Wing, who was my predecessor, what is this and how do we engage? Because every child he knew had a phone with a bunch of stuff on it. They were getting emails. What's going on here, and how do we connect? Because in his mind, he saw the internet and technology not just as a place to do business, but to become a part of the business. And so his mindset was, how do we make sure that there is minority participation? How do we make sure that there are people, in decision-making positions that look like you and I? And so we started to go to shareholder meetings with Reverend Jackson, and we went to shareholder meetings. We'd have meetings with executives, CEOs, CFOs, COOs, and board members. And what we did, we asked them to show their diversity numbers. And you remember this, you were part of some of these initial interviews and we had after these shareholder meetings. And we were asking, show us your data, show us how many minorities you have, how many people of color you have in your workforce, in your, various levels of executive suites, C-suites, boards. And the numbers were so low that it became a conversation. Well, look, hey, since so many of us are consumers, we don't want to just use your Apple products. We want to be a part of the process of creating, developing, and being employed by companies like Apple and Intel and Microsoft and others. And so this journey, Janice, as you mentioned, has been helping Silicon Valley become more diverse very intentionally. So what has become very normal now, people talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, really started because Reverend Jackson said, this has got to be a part of what Silicon Valley takes on. And we're thankful. And I got to say this, the response we got was very embracing, even with Reverend Jackson's stance on so many things as a civil rights icon and social justice leader. People became aware of the fact we want to sit at the table and work together to make a better product and a better pipeline so that everyone could be a part of this great experience of evolving tech.
Yes, and it was such a visionary stand that he took, and it has continued to open doors. Now, as we're hearing about all of these layoffs, especially in the tech industry, a lot of times it's sometimes first hired and then first fired with certain companies. What are you seeing on the landscape right now?
Unfortunately, a lot of our colleagues in the tech industry, a lot of the companies are struggling in a number of ways. The pandemic had a very troublesome effect, obviously, on their ability to generate revenue in normal fashions as they had previously. Even though the technology platforms were a benefit for survival because we were sheltering in place, we were doing everything online, meetings and things, became so remote. Their capacity to build products that would generate their ongoing revenue streams, to build their ongoing ability to expand as companies shifted. And even, people who were going into their office in Silicon Valley and Mountain View and Santa Clara and San Jose, they weren't going into offices anymore. And so all of a sudden, workforce is moving to different locations. People are living in a less expensive part of the country, and they are finding that they can do so many more things remotely. And then because so many consumers became more adept at using technology, different things weren't as critically needed to be created as much as just made available. And so what happened was there are whole shifts in these companies where this whole department is no longer needed. This group over here is no longer, critical because we just want to make sure that our base, our consumers are able to access us, but we're not building the same kinds of things. We're not doing the same kind of things on the ground. And so people were getting laid off. And to this day, I mean, some of the companies, unfortunately, that we are going to have at our conference just went through a series of layoffs. And so, a lot of convergence changes in some of the government regulations and some of the unfortunate things that happened with the internet through the past two presidential election cycles and the midterm elections. All of that created problems within the technology industry that they weren't ready for. And it's one of those things where sometimes you don't know what you need until you need it.
Right.
And that's kind of what happened with the tech industry. There are things that were evolving so quickly that were disrupted, and they didn't realize they didn't have enough of the infrastructural support or plans or things in place. They lost a lot of talent. They lost a lot of people that are no longer in the valley, and they lost the momentum of just continuing to build this ecosystem for an economical benefit. So now the layoffs are real, and the people are looking for what's my plan B or my plan C, or what do I go from here? And part of this conference is going to be able to address that, because there's some companies that were prepared. I've got to give credit to Cisco because they have continued to thrive. Now, mind you, a lot of what Cisco does has to do with the nuts and bolts of how you create these systems,
Right.
opposed to just being online and, showing a TikTok video, right? And so it's really gotten back to the bare bones of sometimes you got to make sure that your insides are right before you make your outside too pretty. It's one of those, physical being translated to the technology, because you can be beautiful on the outside, but if the inside's not right, then things aren't right. And that's what we have seen happen with the tech industry.
Yeah, it's like what I say when I'm coaching people: prepare for your inner close-up as well as your outer close-up. It's the same
Beautiful.
in everything.
Absolutely.
And you know that from a
Yeah.
spiritual standpoint too.
No
That's very
question.
true. And certainly also after the tragic murder of George Floyd, we saw a real commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion with many companies. But in the years since, my understanding is that there's been a waning of some of that commitment, and some commitments have not been honored. Have you seen that as well?
Unfortunately, I have, and our company, Rainbow Push, that's part of the conversation we're going to have at the conference as well. I mean, we don't want to bypass that, because the George Floyd incident, it really triggered a lot of emotion and desire to make a change, make some differences. And, sometimes people want to help, but they don't know how to help. And so the knee-jerk responses, which, we understand we're in the middle of the pandemic, we're still trying to navigate health issues and whether or not people can even be in the same space. But now we have this unfortunate tragedy of this young man losing his life. What does that mean for us in terms of, the fact that minorities are still mistreated in this country? People of color still have an upward battle. How do we respond? And so a lot of companies say, let's just put some money out there. Let's make a commitment. Let's say we're going to do something over the next 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, and that'll be it. But unfortunately, not all of those commitments have been fulfilled, as you mentioned. Not all of those commitments were made in a way that could be sustainable. And a lot of those commitments, unfortunately, were not mapped out. And so if you're going to give me $5, but you don't tell me where I can spend it, then that $5 may go up in smoke, or it may go the wrong direction, or may not be used in a healthy way. And a lot of the money that were used weren't used to build infrastructure, even for the companies or organizations they were trying to help, or the causes they were trying to build. I think companies like Cisco, and I give a lot of credit to Airbnb and even Facebook. Facebook was Meta now. They were challenged governmentally, they were challenged internally, and they started doing internal audits about how we make diversity and civil rights the right way. And so we're actually going to be presenting some of the civil rights reports and evaluations from these companies internally who have made the commitment. They admit we didn't do it right. But then you've got dozens of others that didn't do it right, and now they're just kind of sitting there on their hands saying, well, we did the best we could because we didn't know any better, but now you all have to figure out all, next steps on your own. And we want to make sure that we can continue the conversation. That's part of the reason you and I were talking prior to coming online about Reverend Jackson's committed to coming to the Valley, because he wants to make sure no one slips through the cracks with these commitments and, it just goes away, because we need to make sure that that people of color, ethnic minorities, at-risk families, youth, education pipelines are still happening. And it's not just lip service, it's actually real service.
Yes, and it's wonderful about his commitment. We were all certainly saddened to hear about the diagnosis of Parkinson's with him, and certainly our prayers continue to be with him for his fortitude with that.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
yes, absolutely. And it's interesting what you mentioned about these reports. So it sounds like there is some degree of transparency. And is there oversight? Is there a real sense of push holding some of the feet to the fire, if you will? Or is it more just conversational and a discovery?
That's a great question. And I'm so grateful that we have learned that you cannot allow for things to just be thrown into the atmosphere. There's got to be some follow up and some actually measurable, tangible ways and accountability with that, and, you cannot conquer what you will not confront. And oftentimes, sometimes we've got to just have those hard conversations. The good thing is that most of the companies are now aware we're not trying to beat you up and embarrass you. This is not something where we want to put you on the spot. We really want to work with you to make a difference, and we can do it. It's just going to take all of us to do. And so, yeah, I appreciate the companies that are going to present their audits, their assessments, their evaluations. The reason they're coming to our conference is so we can do this together. So our hope is that they set a new trend and they establish a new standard, that companies can be this transparent, do an internal audit, make internal assessments, and they're calling them, they're setting up committees that are called civil rights and social justice implementation teams or civil rights audit teams. And, they're being very conscientious about that. And we are going to be right there with them, Janice. We're going to be right there to help them make sense of the numbers, make sense of what they've assessed. And they've actually invited Rainbow Push to be at the table with them. So I've been in the meetings for the past 2 years with at least two of our companies, and now a third is starting theirs now. And I'm going to be at the table so that there's representation. We can know that this is being authentically done, and they're not just checking a box. They're actually serious about trying to make a difference.
That's good to hear. And when it comes to the history of Rainbow Push, and I know it's People United, first it was to save humanity, and then it was
Right.
changed to serve humanity.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of when people are supporting Push, then how do you use those dollars to help communities?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. If you text the word push to 41444, there's always Reverend reminding us, don't forget to ask people to help support us. As an advocacy organization, everything that we do is to help fight for others. And so what happens with the dollars that are invested, oftentimes it's so that we can support the work, support the satellite offices that help to navigate the work regionally, because we have satellite offices, as you know, Silicon Valley, obviously, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York City, headquarters in Chicago.
Yes.
and we actually have affiliates in Dallas and Los Angeles. So in those regions in particular, we roll out programs. We establish the beacon, as it were, of light for the organization, and we engage in direct community organizing. We engage in developing connections with labor, education, the faith community, minority businesses, women-owned businesses, and we are there to help fight on their behalf. We're there to help facilitate, coordinate, organize, boots on the ground. And a lot of times now it's just making sure that the connections are made and that programs can be implemented. As a matter of fact, I'm very, very grateful that our office here in Silicon Valley, we've been able to help launch programs around the country with technology. And so the monies that go into, push tech, they allow us to partner with, many educational organizations around the country, faith entities. As you're well, we actually started our faith tech program from conversations that I know that you actually interviewed Reverend Jackson around, and we were able to help churches stay, sustained through the pandemic because we had trained them on how to live stream, how to do Zoom meetings. I mean, this was pre-pandemic. And I'm grateful, and my background in sports, you and I have had these conversations about our sports, prowesses, both of us, because I work in the sports realm, we've been able to connect with the NBA. So we do NBA All-Star Weekend. We use that platform to help train youth on technology. And so just in case you're not going to be the next Steph Curry, you can actually do some of the analysis through digital training and be able to assess how do we try to guard someone like a Steph Curry, or how do we do some marketing, or how do we do some other types of things. And so a lot of what we do out of our office in particular, I'm so proud that we're able to partner with the NBA. We partner with Ice Cube and his Big Three basketball. Wherever city he goes to, we go there behind him, and we set up, camps for kids to learn about drones and musical production. And, so we do everything. We support these regions and these causes, but then our office in particular, I've always been programmatically minded. And so we make sure that our resources go into job training, education, and providing pipelines of opportunity so others can succeed.
It is amazing in terms of all of that and the connections, because of course you are a pastor as well, and you have the sports connection. And I know you've also
Right.
worked with athletes when they've had
Yes.
challenges in terms of what we've seen now, and now sports is back to where it was before the pandemic,
Hmm.
for the most part, or
Right.
even more so, it seems like, in terms of attendance. But in
True.
terms of helping athletes navigate that period, did you find that there were particular challenges that you had to help them with?
That's a great question. And yes, I'm thankful for, and I said this recently, and I know you can appreciate it. I'm thankful that God trusts me that much. And to have the space that I have as a senior pastor, as I was sharing this actually with our church on Sunday, and then to still have these other responsibilities to navigate for the greater good. I'm humbled by that responsibility. And I've been working with athletes for over 20 years, and the past few years has been interesting, very interesting, because I found that a lot more athletes started to realize messages we've been sharing for years, which are to the extent you're more than an athlete. When that moniker came out and different things, because of the pandemic and because of the convergence, if you think about this, what happened during the pandemic was all kind of tied into some election challenges. Then we had George Floyd, and then we have the COVID-19 pandemic in the middle. And all of a sudden, athletes were looking at life differently. And they became more actively engaged in, voting rights and setting up, voter education. I mean, we did voter education activities with some athletes and things of that nature. And so I think the evolution of challenge brought about the evolution of consciousness among many of the athletes that I work with. And, folks that I've been working with for years, they were already on board. So we just kept moving along step by step. Let's do more. Let's do more. And a lot of athletes that have known me over the years that I've, been introduced to, they said, hey, can we help set up this voting, place in our city? Can we help do a voter registration drive back in my hometown? Can we help make sure that young people have technology? Can we help make sure, so all of a sudden the issues we faced made athletes more aware that they could do more things. Sometimes people don't know what they're capable of doing until they're confronted with a scenario that will force them to even look at the opportunities to do something. And many of the athletes, I've got to give them credit. They took their stance, as you saw. Some have even, when after the George Floyd incident and some of the things that happened, Ahmaud Arbery and others, Breonna Taylor, they made their stances, and I got my T-shirts too. Every time something came out, I just grab mine. So send me mine, guys. I want my vote T-shirt. I want my, Black Lives Matter T-shirt with the NBA logo on it. I want my, more than an athlete. Let's really use our platform, because that's really the message to athletes. Use your platform for something bigger than baseball, basketball, football, and that's what they've been doing, and I admire them for it.
One of the things that we're seeing now when you talk about taking a stand is the desire to have revisionist history and not speak about things at all. For example, slavery being called involuntary relocation, not wanting to refer to Rosa Parks as Black in certain schools, looking at the African American history as a whole not being taught in certain testing curriculum. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that Martin Luther King talked about, you know, the wrong things can evolve when people who know right won't make a stand. He said it in different contexts. He talked about, injustice comes when those, who stand for justice don't stand. In different contexts, different silos. He talked about the fact that people who have a moral compass have to stand. Otherwise, those that don't have one will continue to arise. That's what we're seeing.
Yes, that is indeed what we're seeing, and we could certainly do a whole show about that. But we want to remind everyone to please come out for the Push Tech Conference, Intentional Inclusion, May 8th and 9th. It sounds like a wonderful event. I'm so glad we had a chance to get a preview of it, and much success with everything that's happening there. And it's always great to see you. Thank you for joining
Thank you
us.
so much for your time. Thank you so much for including me in this conversation today and giving me a chance to talk about Reverend Jackson and Rainbow Push and our Push Tech Conference. Looking forward to seeing you real soon. Thanks again.
All right. Look forward to it as well. Blessings to
Take
you.
care.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
All right. And that's our show. I'm Janice Edwards. Thanks for all that you do to make our world a better place. We appreciate you, and we invite you to join us again. We look forward to seeing you then.
To shine.